Mm. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'm going to waffle on for a few minutes while we wait for all of the participants to come in. I can see you all streaming in now, 48, 51, lots of people joining all at once. While we wait to get started, can I just point out that we're in Zoom this time, which is a whole new platform for a Time Team Live. So please bear with us if there are any hiccups. For Time Team Owls are working very hard behind the scenes to make sure this goes well. You should be able to find somewhere the chat so you can fire us any questions or comments as we go. Hello to everyone. Hello in the USA already. Fantastic. It's great to see so many of you joining. We've got someone from the Netherlands as well. Fantastic. So please keep your hellos coming in. It's always lovely to see who you are and where you are. I'll also draw quick attention to the question and answer box. If you have any specific questions that you'd like to ask us as we go on, please fire it into the Q&A box so that we can see it, and I'll make sure that the team can answer your questions. I believe this is the first time we've done this, so I'm not 100% sure, but I believe you can upvote questions as well. So if someone's asked a burning question that you want answers to, please give it a thumbs up. I can see that people are still coming in and still saying hello. Hi, Mia from Norway. Hi, Northern California, Toronto. Oh, a question about yew trees. Fantastic. We have a list of questions as well, but feel free to repeat your question in the Q&A box so that we can get it to the top of the list. It'll be great to have some live questions coming in throughout. Oh, we've got Isle of Wight. Hello from not very far away. Hi, Judith. Hi, Sue. Hi, Laura
people from Norfolk.
Yeah.
Good to see. Not far from me.
I think there's only two of us from Yorkshire, Naomi.
Yes. I was going to say, if there's anyone watching from Yorkshire, please say hello in the chat.
Yes, please do.
Okay, thank you everyone for firing in your hellos and questions. I can see that the attendees list is starting to plateau now. We're still lacking one Jay Gator, but I believe he's going to try and join us at some point soon. But we may as well get proceedings started. So welcome everyone to this very special Time Team Live, following on from our Halston dig. And you can see we've got some of your favorite Time Team experts with us today. And I must admit, Time Team has had a bumper few months. I've been really enjoying, as a Time Team fan, I've been really enjoying the last few months of Time Team. And there are three things that I that stood out to me and I want to kind of draw attention to before I hand over to the people that you would much rather be hearing from. The first of which, Halston, what an absolute triumph of an episode that was. Emily and the team have done a fantastic job behind the scenes, pulling that together and creating arguably one of the most fantastic post-revival episodes we've had so far. I really enjoyed watching it, and I know a lot of the graphics by Matt Clark and the Shadow Tour team help tell that story in a way that I think is enriching the Time Team experience for everyone. So that has been an absolute highlight for me from the last few months. The next ones, I'm a little bit biased, but I've enjoyed Grease coming out. I won't say too much on that because we'll probably have a Zoom about that at some point in the near future. But if you haven't seen it, do go and watch it. It's different. It's not quite Time Team as you'd expect, but we thoroughly enjoyed making it and thoroughly enjoyed sharing it with you. But I think my final Time Team highlight of the next few months, it relates to the Halston dig, and it's the Time Team embracing of a Marvel style post-credit scene. I think that has been an absolute joy to see Emily and the production team creeping that in. And it begs the question, and I was hoping, I kind of scripted out what I wanted to say here. I was hoping John was going to be here to ask him the question directly, but I can ask Stuart instead. Stuart, did you buy John a drink in the end?
Oh no. If I had, I wouldn't admit it anyway. I bought John more beers than I've wished to count, I suspect, over the years.
Fantastic.
You just can't remember them.
That's right.
Right, I think then I'm going to jump in with some questions, and we've had one question, possibly more than any others, relating to this dig, and I think we should start with the big one, start with the elephant in the room. We'll come straight to Stuart. Stuart, did we find the Preceptory?
The answer to that is Yes, we found the site of the preceptory. I have absolute confidence in that. The range of finds, the documentary evidence, the contextual evidence, all. Hello, John.
Sorry, I'm late.
It all comes together to be within the precinct defined by that moated enclosure. What we didn't establish was the layout of all the buildings inside it, but as you saw, it's a large enclosure. You're never going to identify every building, and there was a massive amount of landscaping went on there in the late 17th, 18th century, and before that there was a manorial series of courtyards and barns and everything else on the site. So there's a lot of demolition and garden earths all on top of where the preceptory buildings would have been laid out. So we found enough evidence for me to say that we have found the site, and propose to carry on doing more work there as well.
This afternoon I've been glued to my Gmail inbox because there's been a stream of emails circling around this particular chat group, and I know one of the most arguably impassioned emails, I read it in a very John voice in my head, was from John, kind of arguing not that we didn't necessarily find the preceptory, but maybe we didn't add quite as much as we thought. John, what do you think?
I'm going to back off from being devil's advocate, because I think there is so much evidence there. But then again, when it comes to the crunch, what we found was not quite right. There's still a mystery to the site, where the buildings are, and the actual layout. I don't know, we always have jokes about, what's happening and so on. I'm sure Stuart is right, and it's only because I want him to buy me the beer. But I don't know. I missed the first few minutes. I'm sorry. I've been having huge technical problems, but we're not quite there, Stuart. I could challenge you a lot more, but when it comes to the crunch, we found a few finds from the period, but we didn't find any structures.
Well, I think that's one of the things we would love to debate over a beer in a pub, I suspect, with time. But we did find quite a good range of finds on that site, and they were all starting to come together towards the end, particularly the cobbled surfaces, which I'm sure Hilda would like to tell us more about later on, the proper cobbles as they were referred to in the story. But those layers, we were just getting down to the medieval layers when we had to leave the site, and that is something that became obvious as we dug in trenches 1, 2 and 4, I think it was, that we were a long way above the medieval levels, about at least a good half a metre or so. And it's in those areas where we've got the few medieval finds that we've got, the glazed roof tiles, the floor tiles, we dated the cobble surface. It's all, we're right at the start of the journey in many ways. There's enough evidence that that's the precinct. Absolutely confident about that the moated enclosure is the precinct. And what we would do if we have, it's quite a large area inside, if we had more time, we'd dig all around the edge and we'd concentrate now on the north side. But we set out there to do an evaluation of what is there, and that evaluation is enough to make us to carry on with that journey.
Yes, because isn't that the point of time team, really? I'm sorry to jump in on the top of you, so to speak, John, but isn't that the whole point, that if we'd be a completely different television program if we did the excavation without the cameras there and then presented it to the public? The point is that it wasn't easy, and everybody saw that it wasn't easy, and we had to think about it. And I was speaking to I had a chat with Guy de la Betroyere about it, because he said he watched it twice, and he said it was a great program because it was, yeah, I know, I was surprised as well, old cynical Guy. He said he really enjoyed it because it wasn't all laid out, because it was a mystery, because we knew what was there, but we couldn't quite find it in the 3 days, and that's the whole point of it, isn't it?
I'm in total agreement, Helen, and that's all. It's been part of the banter in the way. We have so much evidence, or Stuart has so much evidence for that site, and everything points to it being there. I'm being a bit provocative, but I'm still arguing that when it came to the crunch, although we're all confident it's there, we didn't actually find any medieval buildings. We can't prove that the cobbled surfaces are medieval in date. A lot of them, the structural elements we found were later in date. And it perfectly sums up the archaeological problem of lots of sites. You've got a limited amount of time. It's the start of the journey. I totally agree that. But all I would argue is, at the moment, we can't have the conclusions saying we've definitely got it because we're not there.
Now, not having those conclusions kind of allows me, I think, to bring Hilda in. You were there on the front lines in the trenches, excavating that wonderful cobbled surface. And as we said, we were scratching the surface of this site. We were starting to get to the levels we were hoping to find. If we could go back, Hilda, what would you want to do? How would we resolve this?
I would very much agree with everything that's just been said by the three of you, and you're all being very agreeable with each other, which is surprising. But I would agree with this in terms of, there's no firm evidence to kind of prove that this was a medieval site. However, there is kind of strong circumstantial evidence. Yes. I would say that the historical evidence is very strong. The archaeological evidence does not kind of counter any of this. I would say it actually does support it, but it would be nice to get a little bit more. But again, I very much agree, this is only the start. It would be nice to, if we could go back, I would like to see how the different trenches kind of connect in terms of their different levels. So I was a lot deeper in trench 2 than Matt was he in trench 1?
Trench 1, yeah.
Yeah. And we already noticed this during the dig and said, Matt said, I wonder if the kind of medieval level is more on kind of on the same level that you're at, because I was starting to get a few bits of medieval material. So it'd be nice to go back to those post-medieval evidence trenches and see what's underneath, basically. Dig deeper is often the answer.
Digging deeper is something I fully support, and maybe we could get a petition going to send the expedition crew out to dig some deeper holes and try and resolve these questions in future. But I know of all of us, the person who went deepest into the ground was probably Naomi, working alongside Henry with your coring device, which we saw Henry
the coring device, yeah,
into the ground. Now, I know it's still very early days in terms of post-ex, in terms of processing, but is there anything we've learned so far from that since the episode, or anything we can learn from the wider environmental work you've been doing?
Yeah, there's a number of things, like you say, that are going on, but there's a few things that can be said. It's very interesting in terms of, oh, sorry, something has just popped up as a thing on my screen. It's just blocked your face. That's really put me off. Sorry, everybody. Classic Sue Paul. Yeah, so it was interesting when Henry and I were going around doing the coring. In the program, you see us get down to, I think we were a metre and a half, and it took quite a while because you're going down in sort of small cores. And yeah, it was really quite confusing. And after 1.5 meters, and to get that piece of charcoal, and it was like, what's going on here? But in terms of sort of water management, I think everything that needed to be said was kind of said in the program. It would have been nice. I know Henry ran around and did some more coring, more than I could, because I was running around elsewhere. But yeah, if we were to go back, it would be brilliant to do a more intensive survey of that, because you've got these really obvious features in the landscape that, you know, are begging to be probed out more than we could. But yeah, some very encouraging results, definitely, in terms of sort of the history of the site, and in terms of what was going on. Yeah, I mean, Stuart, what do you think yourself?
Yeah, I think one thing that wasn't obvious in the programme was the topography, the amount of wet alluvial ground around it, which is great for giving us time depth on what's going on in a landscape.
Yeah.
The enclosure is actually on a raised island. It's maybe only it's about 2 meters above the floodplain of the river. But it's basically a series, all that landscape, there's a series of low glacial deposits. They're like mini hills, but very low. And the preceptory enclosure is sitting just nicely on the highest of those islands. Around.
What enclosure?
Sorry? I missed that, John.
I said, what enclosure's sitting on top?
The preceptory enclosure. Because there are a series of glacial deposits in all this wetland, the potential archaeologically for looking at the total time depth of that landscape right back through prehistory and even to geological periods is enormous within within a stone's throw of that site. So environmentally very rich if we could explore out a bit from the actual enclosure itself.
I mean, even within the enclosure itself, if we could take, we had one set of coring equipment, but, you know, having been there and experienced it, it would be nice to take a different set of coring equipment, because then we could really get some sort of finer samples to then do some micromorphology and find out more that way. But yeah, the potential is huge there, which is really exciting and encouraging.
I think one of the things that, I mean, we couldn't explore on the programme, but because that landscape is a series of low islands amongst all this flooded wetland area,
yeah,
look at the aerial photography for the area around about it, virtually every field has got lots of overlapping crop marks.
Yeah,
there's barrow cemeteries, there's Iron Age enclosures, there's a massive Roman temporary camp only about half a kilometre away. I mean, it's actually, people have been living on those islands for thousands of years, and the hospitallers are just one generation of occupants, as it were.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I can see so many questions are pouring in. It's somewhat baffling in Zoom. There seems to be hundreds and hundreds of them flying in. So I'm going to try and get to some of the questions now, but I'm going to pop over to some that we had pop up on Patreon earlier. And there's been lots of questions, and I must admit that you guys have been paying so much attention to so many of the small details of the site, and with questions that had never occurred to me. So the team, Naomi included, have put together an amazing list of questions by category, so I can work through some of the main ones. And there's been lots of questions about the Saxon font. That seems to have captured an awful lot of imaginations in terms of the folks watching. Now, I don't know necessarily who's best to answer any of these questions, so I'm just going to throw them out and hope for the best.
Helen.
I'm going to cast a Helen-shaped net into the Zoom. Is the hole in the bottom for drainage or an attachment to the base?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. The hole in the bottom of a modern font is for drainage. Useful to be able to get the water out again. But I have to say, I don't know a huge amount about fonts, because there was a second font, wasn't there, that somehow missed the. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about all the way through the programme was, I know it's longer now, but it's still very short when compared with the 3 days that we took to actually look at it all. And there was a lot in that church. I mean, we could have stayed in that church for all 3 days. It was just extraordinary. And that font, I would like to know where it's from, because it's clearly not, it looked so peculiar in that 17th century world that the interior of the church was. And we got Megan and Joe to have a look at it, the Saxon stone people, who were just random. They were just random diggers, weren't they? It turned out we had 2 of the best Anglo-Saxon sculpture people who Stuart had got along just to lend a hand. I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary. And that they tried to look at it in every single light, but really it could probably have done with a bit more imaging, and we need to play with all the whizzy stuff.
I think one of the things that's come out afterwards in discussion, because those 2 random people, one's a professor here and the other is with the CBA, but
couldn't get better.
I should probably refer to them as random diggers now.
No, they were acting as random diggers. They're not just random diggers.
In the chapel, I think the consensus there was that there were 2 different things. That the one on they're not the same font. They're not 2 parts of one structure, as it were. That they are different, and that the one on the top potentially was the most interesting in terms of early date. And of course, Halston was mentioned at Doomsday. There is actually a decent settlement at Halston at Doomsday, so there's always a possibility there is a chapel, a Saxon chapel at Halston, just a little bit about 300 meters north of our chapel is where there is a major crossing of these islands, where the wetlands come to a narrow point, Naomi, and that's been a crossing since well into prehistory, and that's probably where the settlement was. So it's possible that font maybe even come from a chapel there, Helen.
It is all absolutely, fascinating, and including the stone coffin, the logistics of moving that around, which we touched on in the programme. Given that that's there, what else is there? It feels like, I mean, I know it's a tiny little space, but there is so much in just that churchyard enclosure. It does seem like there's so much more to do.
Never mind what's under the church, but we'll come back to that a bit later. I think I'm going to hijack a question, an amazing question from Charlotte Edmonds, who asks, do you have a favourite find or potential line of investigation that didn't make it into the programme? But I'm going to segue this a little bit and say, Helen, I know that you spent a lot of time working behind the scenes on this project, and I'm wondering if there's anything particularly from your work that you discovered through the documentary evidence that didn't find its way to the screen.
Oh, there was so much. That was one of the slightly frustrating things, as I'm used to doing all this historical research, and then it dovetails in. We find something, and then I can say, I can shed a bit of light on that through the historical research. I had to do all this research, which basically was hardly used, simply because we didn't have the right archaeology to fit in with the history. And I think it would have been it would be wonderful to have made a whole documentary about Knights Hospitallers, the way in which that Rory explained that the way that they fit into all the different aspects of medieval life, and the Crusades, and the looking after the soul as well as the body, so protecting people bodily, and also protecting and looking after their eternal souls. I feel that that's always something that we forget when we're doing research into a religious site, how important, how crucial all of this was, because this life is short, the next life is permanent, and if you don't get your spiritual destination sorted out in this life, then people can pray for you all they like, but it's not really going to change an awful lot. You've really got to get it to do the right thing in this life, and that's what everybody's trying to do in the medieval period. And it might not look like it from our point of view, but I think that kind of bigger picture, which we didn't quite manage to show because we kept finding things that were inexplicable and we needed to explain. An hour and a half is not long enough.
I definitely think the editorial team and the direction team under Emily could probably produce a whole series of side project documentaries from the footage they filmed from this site. And I don't know, I feel keep your Patreon funding coming, and you never know. That may happen in the future. Now, going through the questions, there's a huge number basically just asking us to go back and do more. And I think I agree, let's do that. That would be a great thing to do. On top of all of the stuff that we've managed to do already and haven't managed to share with people. So let's do that. That sounds great. Lots of questions coming in around the vaults and various elements of the church as well. And I'm going to come to John. What happened? This is a question from Carolina. What happened with the extension of the church that geophysics found beside the walls? Now, was that an extension or was that the vault, John?
I think we must be talking about the vault, the crypt, and so on, which gave such clear responses. And I'd been talking to Helen about this and what you would expect beyond the east end of the church. And I think I'm right in saying, Helen, that one point you were saying you wouldn't expect a lot to extend beyond that line because it was a sacred area. Am I choosing the right words? So for us to find these responses that suggested the vault was intact was quite surprising. I mean, am I right, Helen, that is the sacred area?
Yes, absolutely. I must say I got so overexcited sticking my head down into the crypt that I never actually measured out how far we were looking into the crypt and how far underground and how far it was coming out on the other side.
It went 3 meters.
Yeah, 3 meters beyond the line of the church. But did what we could see in the crypt go 3 meters out? I mean, yes. Derek, you had your head down there too. Did what we could see in the crypt match what John was seeing outside, or it did? Okay, so that what we saw was what ran out underneath. Yeah. Therefore, I'm finding it surprising because you could say that there might be something that was connected with a chancel which has now disappeared, and that we've got another undercroft or something underneath the disappeared chancel. But I don't know. I mean, all I can think is that crypt is reasonably late, and that it's squashed in a way that means that you had to excavate underneath, beyond, hoping that nobody would come along with ground penetrating radar and found out what you'd done. I mean, if it wasn't for you damned geophysicists, we'd have got away with it.
I'm not sure that's a good word to use.
Speaking of not good words to use,
no, you're probably right.
Apologize.
Yes, I think about your immortal souls.
Yeah. Again, apologising and trying to save my own immortal soul. Apologies to anyone who may have been offended by the language I used in the church when we opened up the crypt for the first time. Emily very kindly bleeped out. It was people often. We all have the questions about what's the best thing you've ever found. Have you had any kind of gasp-worthy moments as an archaeologist? And in truth, most of archaeology is fairly gentle, painstaking work, which doesn't really ever give you a shock factor or a surprise factor. But being there the moment that stone was lifted and being the first to shine a torch in there was genuinely a heart in mouth moment. I can't quite describe, without swear words obviously, the feeling of doing it and seeing the first thing that I caught a glimpse of was the end of that very ornate decorative coffin, and it was an instant, it took me aback. And Mark Vent, yeah, it was a very much the closest I've ever felt to Indiana Jones, which I don't hate. I'll take that. And then to see how far it extended back and the sheer number of coffins. I don't know off the top of my head how many we had, but just thinking back, it was at least 4 or 5 full coffins, and they were going back beyond the length of a single coffin, hence
Yeah.
the length of it. All in a very higgledy-piggledy state. And I know a lot of the questions as well have related to how much did we go in there? Did we make 3D models? How much did we record it? And in truth, we didn't want to disturb that all that much. The aim of that was to assess the damage done in the previous break-in to the site, so we could do that remotely with cameras and probes. So we haven't I should buy a fedora. We haven't investigated that to the depth that we would normally do on an archaeological site to record everything, because we were not going to disturb it. We were just checking what was there. We've done an assessment of the condition. We've got some identifications in there, but we've put it back to bed for now, really. But
let's say how important that is, Derek, as part of the project. It's a grade 1 listed church, that, and to get an idea of the condition of it in terms of future management and how that church is cared and loved and protected. Just seeing what you got with the scanners and with the camera and so on, it is actually a piece of work that's worthwhile in its own right, regardless of, you know, whether there's any earlier archaeology down there. It's a really important task to undertake that.
I remember an episode of Time Team going back a few years now where you revisited, I think you revisited the very first Time Team, and Mick was talking about how Time Team had changed and developed over the years. And he said one of the emphases that had changed was moving towards preservation through understanding and being able to curate and protect, not by putting it to one side and pretending it's not there, but actually investigating to understand it, to develop preservation and management and conservation strategies. And ultimately, in terms of the opportunity we had to open that crypt, that was very much the ambition there. And I think we learned enough to be able to say what was there. And as I said, I had a very wonderful archaeological moment, which I don't think I'll ever forget. It was amazing.
But I think it's also worth saying quickly, somebody asked in the chat right at the top about how often we encounter something like that, where you're encountering an actual coffin with a name on it and you know who it is. And I think that is very much like visiting the ancestors. You know, you're reasonably respectful in your dealings with them. You know who they are, and you don't want to disturb them any more than is sociable. But you do want to be sociable. You want to be able to say, you may not be with us anymore, but we're still bringing you into our world. You know, we're not ignoring you. We're not saying out of sight, out of mind. We're remembering you, and we're saying hello in a respectful manner. My grandparents are buried in a vault, and it's one where you can actually go down steps and look round. And we go down there when there's a funeral, and we say hello. And I know that maybe sounds a bit odd, but I like it, and it rather cheers me up that I can do that, because there's no gravestones to Mad Jack Mitten or his father or his children. We're just saying hello. We're just saying we haven't forgotten about you.
Just checking in. Let me see. Could we collect a small sample to test and see if there was really a bear skin in the crypt?
Naomi, what do you think? I mean, it certainly looked like something very, very furry. It wasn't velvet, and it also, the preservation was very good.
Yeah.
Would hair do that?
Yeah. I mean, if it really was a pelt under there, because I remember sort of shortly after the crypt was open and I was walking around, and I was lucky enough to actually, you know, put my head in for the first time as well and go, oh my goodness. And in truth, just looking around, just taking everything in, I didn't actually see the pelt. I wasn't even thinking about the people underneath. I was just like, I can't believe what we've got under here. But it was only after looking at the wonderful sort of the 360 capture, because I know Matt and Jonathan put in a fancy ball on a stick in there and got a brilliant 360, a massively brilliant 360 image. But yeah, it was only until I saw that photograph and I went, oh, because originally when people were like, oh, he's buried with his bear, me being me with my sort of bonehead on, as it were, I was like, oh, there could be a bear skeleton. And then someone went, actually, no, there could be a pelt. And I went, whoa, I was like, that's brilliant. I mean, that's so perfect and a lot easier than laying an actual whole bear out there. But yeah, I reckon if it was preserved well enough, you could have taken a little piece of that pelt, but we didn't. It didn't even come up really as a thought, because we wanted to leave everything intact that was underneath there. But yeah, technically, yes, I guess it could happen. Whether it should happen, I'm not sure. But yeah, it's very interesting to see what was under there. Once I saw that 360 capture, I was like, that's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Yeah.
I quite like the correct use of the term bonehead there. That's I'm glad you're back, John, because we've got an amazing question from Mike Taylor, which I can't help but put to you. Does John know that Stuart Ainsworth taught you a geophysics course last year?
Well, taught to who? Himself?
Technically not true. I hosted a course on which we had geophysicists teaching a course.
Well, he obviously didn't choose me to come and teach.
No, no, you're too expensive, John. Sorry, mate.
Yeah.
And a very, very quick fire one, because I think we've addressed elements of it, but from Tony Jebson: are preceptories like monasteries with extensive water management systems, and are there evidence of any?
Well, the answer to that is yes. There are only, I think, if I remember the numbers correctly, in that 1338 visitation that we refer to a lot in the programme, which is like an inventory of the Hospitaller sites at that date, I think there was something like 36 preceptories, and then there are two other grades below. There's about 54 of that type of institution, as it were, at that time. And today we've only got knowledge of 12 of those that survive in any form whatsoever that you can still see. They are very rare. We know very little about them. And that's why it was so important, the work we were doing there, because there is only one example that's been excavated, and that was at South Witham. And that site at South Witham has a lot of similarity, both in size and the position of the chapel at the centre of the site, with a square graveyard around it, and so on. So we've only got one site we can actually really compare evidence with. And all the sites that survive, I'll say all of them, there's only about a dozen, have all got complex water management systems, because fish are an important part of the monastic diet. They've all got fish ponds associated with them. They've all got enclosure ditches, about 4 or 5 of them that we know of have got moats around them, as we had at Halston. So management of water, being near river courses, manipulating water for mills. A mill was mentioned in the 1338 inventory as well. Water is an essential fabric of a monastic institution of the Knights Hospitallers, and we had all those ingredients there at Halston.
Did we find a mill?
No, we didn't look for the mill, but we've a fair idea. We have a fair idea where it's likely to be, because there was a dispute and a map was produced, and it's a little bit further up the river, closer to where the probable site of Halston, the village, was at Doomsday. So it's mentioned in the visitation there would have been a mill, but we didn't have the resources to go chasing that up the river, I'm afraid.
Another this one's a quick fire question. I'm going to put it to everyone in the group, I think, and I'll start with Hilda as your top left on my screen. If each of you could choose another's role within the team to take on in the next dig, who would you choose and why?
Oh. Honestly, I'd probably make the tea. just being involved at all was great, and I was very much prepared to do that on the first dig that I joined, because I turned up, didn't really know what I was doing yet, ended up just picking up a shovel and digging holes, and no one told me to stop, and here I am. So but honestly, Derek, your own role as dig watch would be quite nice, because you get to walk around and see everything. So because we're in such a rush over the 3 days, especially working in a trench, you tend to get kind of tunnel vision, and then you only see the wider product when you see the episode back. And it used to be a relaxing experience for me to watch Time Team, but now I kind of watch like this. That's it. Even though they're amazing episodes, it's quite stressful.
You give me far too much credit there. I know nothing of anything. I can't even remember day 3.
Getting around the site and seeing everything would be quite nice, I think.
It's a joy. And Stuart, how about you?
Oh, I definitely become a geophysicist. I quite happily swap places with John for an episode, and get to look at over his plots and argue with Stuart. That would be good fun. And then I could buy Stuart a beer. You see, that would be even more fun. So
Yeah.
no, I think it's quite. I think it's quite a salutary thinking exercise. Seriously, think, well, what would I do if I didn't do what I did on Time Team? At the end of the day, you realise that actually it's such a sort of like a machine, isn't it? You kind of it's like letting people loose. They all do their own little jobs, and sometimes you haven't got a clue what somebody else is doing or what they're finding. And it's only, as Hilda says, it's only time later on you actually find, oh, that's what they found, oh, that's what they did, oh, that's what John didn't do. You know, you put it all together afterwards. You don't have time to do it at the time.
How about you, Naomi?
Oof, I don't know. I'm with Hildy there on like making the tea, but I'd make sure everyone had potatoes, whatever potato product they wanted, because that's what I live on. If anybody knows me, that's how I live and exist in this world. I don't know, because my poor old knees can't take digging anymore. I don't know. I'd like to do geophys if I got to go on the quad bike. That's it. No walking about for me. I'd like to be on the quad bike. Either that, or I really always wanted to hold the boom microphone. But I just worry that there'd be a gust of wind and I'd be gone. That's it. But yeah, apart from that, I don't know. I'm quite happy in what I'm doing. But yeah, as long as I was there, then that'd make me happy anyway.
You would just start whacking people in the face for fun with the boom anyway. It's probably best.
How about you, Helen?
Well, I'd like to do Naomi's job, because I like finds, I like objects that tell you about stuff, but the kinds of things I do are very rarely found on ordinary archaeological sites. They're things that are dropped and not found again. They're not rubbish. You know, you don't drop a coin and think, oh, well, you know, I can't be bothered to pick that up. My things are valuable, and therefore they actually, in some ways, they tell us a lot because they've had a lot of investment, but in some ways they don't tell us enough, because the only people that can afford to put all this investment in are rich people. And I always try to have something stripy around me on these kinds of things, because I keep thinking I've got to remember what Mick used to say and what Tony says as well, which is that we're here to look at not the top people who make it into history, but we're here to look for and bring to light the people who never made it into history. And that's what Naomi does. You look at rubbish, don't you? You look at the remains of, I mean, literal rubbish. It's the remains of meals. It's the remains of the people who, remains of food processing, and the remains of well, all sorts of after effects of meals that I won't mention, drains and that kind of thing. You know what I mean? And all human life is there. It's not just rich people, and that's what makes our sites good. It's that we look at real life, not just what makes it into the history books. So I'd like to do Naomi's. I'd need a lot of training.
I'm going to call you. We're going to swap jobs like next week, Helen.
I like the idea of looking at Helen with Naomi's Yorkshire accent and the other way around.
And the
It's quite
long, sexy
interesting.
gloves. I mean, let's not forget that.
I love long gloves. I wear them to the opera.
Oh my God, this has got my brain whizzing for the next shoot. But yes, carry on.
Before this takes a turn, I'm going to go to John, I think.
Well, I'd love to have the intellect of Helen, the imagination of Stuart, the looks of everyone else on the team. But the person I'd like to be is the director, Emily, because she's like a geophysicist. She takes a rational view about everything that she's presented with, and she pulls it all together.
Mm.
The geophysics tells the whole story, and the director tells the whole story and doesn't make things up. So I'd love to be Emily for a night.
I'm going to echo Helen's comment in the chat that Emily's job is by far the hardest. But Emily, if you're watching today, I hope you feel better soon. I think I can speak for all of us when I said we love the effort and the work you put into the last episode. It was absolutely brilliant, and we miss you, and hopefully we'll see you at the next live. I've been flagging up interesting questions, and I'm gonna read this one out because it's written far more eloquently than I could ever possibly paraphrase, and it's from Richard Seaton. Hi team, do you have any information about the yew trees that feature in the Preceptory dig? I believe it was usual practice to place religious and cultural buildings around already established sites with a yew tree already growing. So roughly how old would those yews be? I'll say Stuart on this one, I think.
Well, traditionally they're to ward off evil, aren't they, Helen? That's one of the understood perceptions of yew trees. Am I right in that understanding?
Well, there are many theories about yew trees, and none of them, as far as I'm concerned, are even over the balance of probabilities. I find yew trees very, very difficult, and I would love somebody to. I did think there was some research going on in Yorkshire at one point. Somebody at Leeds. It is one of the hardest and most intractable problems, I think, in the siting of churches. But so I'll go on, Stuart, carry on, and I'll just say not sure about that one for the time being. I
think what's important about myths, the folklore that go with it, the myths and the folklore are often part of the story themselves, aren't they? And they generate their own stories. And the importance of memory and folk memory and why something is where it is. You often see trees referred to in Anglo-Saxon boundaries, don't you? And references to trees.
Absolutely.
Because they're visible in the landscape, and the importance. There's a really good PhD being done on the importance of trees and things like clearings in woodland that's being done by Oswald at York, about the importance of spaces within treed areas. Trees are sort of such a part of the fabric of the landscape, but also part of the fabric of the archaeology of landscapes as well, and what shapes what goes on in the landscape. That I think every tree potentially tells a story in its own way, and we understand them so little. That's why we should care about trees much more than we actually do in many cases.
Yes.
In archaeological studies, and particularly where there's excavations involved particularly in commercial archaeology and so on, they're often not even referred to, and yet they're an input. They can help you date features, they can help you understand the environment of that period, and so on and so forth. They're as much an archaeological artifact as a piece of pottery.
Totally, and do you remember the one at Holston that was on the edge of the ditch? That was absolutely perfect piece of dating evidence. But the trouble with a yew is that it rots from the centre out, and so you can never get a proper dendro date on it. And people want them to be incredibly old. They're often by the south side of a church, but the idea that a church would be sited because of a tree seems completely wrong, in that we have a lot of evidence for what does drive the siting of churches, and it's usually in the 10th century. It's usually where the Lord lives. There's a surprise. That it's not actually the whole community who are deciding, hey, let's put this on a sacred site. It's the Lord saying, no, actually, I don't want to get my feet wet. I don't want to have to walk very far. You put it next to my house. And when you do completely excavate a church, which isn't done very often, usually the earliest thing on the site is a burial. And so people say, oh, well, look at this. A church is put on an earlier burial site, but it's never a burial it's only stratigraphically earlier. There's almost never anything like a furnished barrow in a churchyard. Someone will have to stop me at some point, because I could easily now begin to go into an hour lecture on this. So somewhere like Ogbourne St Andrew in Wiltshire, where there is a barrow in the churchyard, is incredibly rare. You don't get Anglo-Saxon cremation pottery in churchyards. It just doesn't seem to work. And the use that I'm familiar with from old drawings and old photographs do seem to get very big very fast, and I wonder how good are our dates for ancient use. When someone says, oh, this one's 4,000 years old, what's the evidence for that? That's what I want to see.
Surely the trees are later, and the trees are planted there because of the historic site, not the other way around.
Yeah.
That's my feeling. Yeah,
I would agree with that. I don't agree with John very often, but I definitely agree with that.
I think while we're on the subject of trees, I'm going to give a little shout out to my archaeological life partner Lawrence, who couldn't join us today. The other half of the budget Southern Anton deck, as Hilda once described us. He's had a busy week at a conference in Amsterdam, so he's a little bit worse for wear today. But I hope
yeah.
Especially in Amsterdam.
I thought people like him weren't supposed to be going to Amsterdam anymore.
Yeah, British tourists.
I'm going to swiftly move on to a question from Jim Leininger, who wants to go back to one of our earlier questions about stuff not making the show, but specifically wants to hear from Hilda and Naomi. So let's go Hilda first. Is there anything that you found, or we found collectively on the dig, that didn't make it to the show and you wish it had?
I don't think there was any find from my trench that didn't make it into the edited episode. But I suppose there was a moment that didn't make it in, which was finding a piece of pottery, datable pottery from the cobbled surface. And it was one of those moments that was just a bit too good to be true, because I remember saying in the pub scene at the end of day 2, the one question I want to answer is, I want to get some dating from this cobbled surface. And the next day, just before the end of the day, got a nice piece of pottery from the cobbled surface. So my face when that came out was quite funny, probably. But it's one of those moments, like, you can't catch everything on camera, and they're doing a brilliant job at being so on top of the production team, of being so on top of what's going on in each trench, but you can't catch every moment. And one like that just can't be recreated. You've got to just put it back and then kind of pretend to find it again. So that's something that didn't make the cut, but that was a pretty good moment.
How about you, Naomi?
Oh, I'm not sure, really. I mean, yeah, I mean, the weird bones that were in Matt's trench with the brick structure is something that I'm still working through. So yeah, that's still puzzling me. But yeah, it was a crazy sight. It was really nice. I remember just running around a lot, because with all the test pits and wanting to make sure samples were taken, and just really enjoying it all, really, and seeing every time I went around the trench there was more and more structures coming up. So but yeah, no, I don't think there's anything there that I would have liked to have seen, or anything that missed the program necessarily. It's weird, because soil was processed throughout the program, but there was no soil in the program because it was just clearly too exciting and there was just too much going on. But yeah, no, I loved it. I loved all of it. There's nothing that I wasn't missing from the program. No.
Which is a good sign. It means that they've done a great job at putting the story onto the screen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've loved watching it, just watching it back going, yes. I remember watching it with my mum. I think one of the episodes, was it on Mother's Day? And she's like, why are you sort of cheering and clapping? She's like, did you not know what was happening? I was like, well, no. I mean, look at the size of the area and look at what we were all doing. So it's always such a joy to watch the programs back, you know.
No, I'm supposed to only really be answering questions from the patrons here, but I've had a question fly in from our time team admin here, saying to ask Naomi about the sheep spine.
Oh, can't tell more yet. Yeah, not necessarily a sheep spine either, but yes, no, very it was weird. What you could see on the program was weird, really weird sort of butchery, but I think that actually in itself will give us a clue as to what that brick structure was all about, to be honest. So yeah, watch this space on that one. Yeah, the bones will reveal, they will reveal all.
You see, I knew it was best to be a bone person. I should have started off with bones.
No, it's a slippery slope, Helen. Don't. No, you stay where you are, love. It's all right. It's a slippery slope to madness if you come to my side of these things.
Yes, stay with the madness of Anglo-Saxon cemeteries.
Stay tuned, folks. I'm gonna move on to some of the virtual stuff now, and I'm conscious we're running out of time, and we're sort of eating into everyone's bank holiday evening time, but we've had a lot of questions about the virtual museum, about some of the virtual work that's gone on, and I just want to give a brief shout out to Matt and the Shadow Tour team for doing some absolutely breathtaking reconstruction work. Some of the VFX they did, the visual effects they did for this episode, blew my mind, and I've been seeing what they've been up to, and yet when it appeared on screen I gasped at how kind of powerful and pervasive some of the imagery was. It was amazing. And this is me asking a nerdy question, but I'm going to indulge because I can. Why not? Stuart, how do you go about guiding Matt and the team when it comes to laying out sites and making 3D models? Do you have to kind of give them a stick figure sketch, or where does that process begin with you?
Well, it's a process that evolves as thinking changes as well. You don't have one thing and you stick with it. Each hour, each day, things change. It sort of goes back a bit to working with Victor and the old time team, where it used to be quite funny, where Victor will be doing a reconstruction, and you come back at the end of the day and more information would come, and Victor would just rub it all out and start drawing it again. The artwork disappears. So it's the same process now, only it can be corrected electronically a lot more, but it's the same process of doing sketches for Matt and talking him through what you think you're seeing. So it's still an analog process at one end, and trying to keep topping it up as you go along, and be willing to change ideas and change how you think the site's evolving.
Fantastic. And in terms of just going around the room very quickly, we've all seen the episode, I guess, and seen Matt and Shadow Tour's reconstructions. I'm interested to know, John, how does the visualizations we saw on screen relate to how you imagined the site may have looked in the past?
They're special, and they always have been special on Time Team. And that has been one of the exciting things about it. I get excited about geophysical plots. I can see something in my head, and I know what I'm looking at, and I know it's real. It's not like Stuart, who makes things up. And I could convey to Victor exactly what I wanted to see. And it's happened with various of the graphic people over the year, but Matt Baer's recent reconstruction work, animation work, whatever, it is just stunning. I mean, it's almost as exciting as our plot.
Now, Helen, I'm very aware that Emily's watching us in the wings here, so I best caution against any spoilers or anything like that. But have you seen any previews of Matt's work for the next site, or can't we talk about that?
I haven't actually. I know I've had some things sent to me, but I've been saving it up for the weekend. I know I've got some time at the weekend where I'm going to go through it, and all I've seen is tiny little thumbnails Oh, except the stuff he did show me right at the beginning when he'd finished doing the jewelry on the next site, which I was part of the excavation team for that. How many years ago now? 8 years ago, and it's the most amazing golden garnet jewelry, and to see the sparkles and how it would really have been seen in the dark, dim firelight of an Anglo-Saxon hall, you know, that is just, it's just incredible. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing the rest of it.
I can't wait for that one to come out. And then I think one very last question about the site for Stuart, because it kind of relates to lumps and bumps and the methodology and why we were there, and it follows on from John's point just now. From Deborah Hayward, on the old map there seem to be a couple of large buildings behind the church. Why didn't you dig there? I'm adding the emphasis for
that map was upside down, that was on screen. The south was at the top and the north was at the bottom. So we were trench 4, which was Chris, where the square structure was that Chris was digging. That is effectively behind the church, and it was in that area where Carenza dug one of her test pits as well, and that's where we seem to be getting most of the building debris that was coming from that area. So in this umbrella of evaluation which this work has set going, and realistically we would never been able to look at a site like this were it not for Patreon supporting this type of evaluation, bringing all these activities together for an extremely rare site. As I said earlier, there's only a handful of these sites, and so every little piece of information that we can put together to move on the knowledge of this particular order and the condition and survival of that site is critically important. So we are at the moment talking about whether we can go back and do some more test pitting, particularly in that area north of the church, which is where most of the noise seems to be coming from, which might give us where the main cluster of buildings might be, the hall, the manor centre later on, and so on. Seems to be a lot more noise there, and it's important to say, to kind of close that these preceptories, and South Witham being the classic example, there's also a lot of open space inside them, courtyards, areas which are just open space because they're keeping animals, they're growing things in there, and so on. It's a real searching for a needle in the haystack to go out and search for one building. So we need to know as much about the whole enclosure as we do individual buildings.
Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic point to begin to draw to a close, and just to thank everybody who's here in this room today and all the patrons watching later. You're not funding an archaeological TV show, you're funding research, and that research has value, it has impact, it has a public good that goes far beyond 90 minutes of entertainment on YouTube. So thank you all for that. Just to give you the outcome of the poll, 48% of you want us to go back and investigate the cobbled surface. So I think a mini expedition crew to Hilda's cobbled surface seems to be the order of the day.
Proper cobbled.
And just to say, we've had so many questions that we couldn't get to today. I'm hoping that following the Zoom, the Time team, Alf team behind the scenes can download the questions, and maybe we can post some written answers to you over the next few days to try and answer some of those questions, because every single one of them is a fantastic question and we just haven't had time to cover them in the detail we'd like to tonight. But I hope you've enjoyed joining us on this, in England at least, bank holiday weekend, and have a lovely whatever you're celebrating over the next few days. And if you've got a scotch to hand, like me and Helen currently do, enjoy. And thank you for joining us. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.
It occurs to me at this point I don't know how to end the Zoom, so I'm just going to sit here and have a sip of scotch.
I've got a disappearing mug.
John, very nice.
It is weird the way they come and go.
What is this? It's just freaking me out.
Come for the archaeology chat, stay for the post-chat confusion at turning off Zoom.
How many of us have got whiskey? Because I feel like this is a weird thing that we've just all decided to have whiskey.
I know, how did that happen?
Well, I've got